Imagine waking slowly in a city nearly 2,000 years ago. The air is cool for a moment. Night is still fading. The sky above the tiled rooftops of Rome is pale gray, just beginning to glow. And somewhere in the distance a door opens. Wood against stone. Footsteps follow. Another day has begun. But mornings in ancient Rome were not quiet in the way we often imagine the past. Within minutes, the narrow streets would fill with sounds. Voices calling. Donkeys braying. Metal shutters lifting from shop fronts. And the smell, perhaps the first thing you would notice. Warm bread baking. With smoke drifting upward. Olive oil heating in clay pans. But also other scents. Animals. Crowded alleyways. And the everyday smells of a city where nearly 1 million people lived close together. Morning in Rome was not peaceful. It was alive. And yet, to the people who lived here it felt perfectly ordinary. The sun has not yet reached the streets below. Most of Rome's roads are narrow. Tall apartment buildings rise on either side. They are called insulae, 5 or 6 stories high sometimes. Built from brick, wood, and plaster. Families live stacked above one another. Merchants, laborers, widows, sailors passing through the city. Rooms are small, walls thin. When someone wakes, others soon follow. Inside one of these upper rooms, a man begins to stir. He is not wealthy. Most Romans are not. His name could be Marcus, or Gaius, or something equally common. His bed is simple. A wooden frame. Ropes stretched across it. A thin mattress stuffed with wool or straw. Comfortable enough but not luxurious. Roman beds often had no blankets in the modern sense. Instead, people slept under layered cloth coverings. In winter they added heavier wool. In summer sometimes nothing at all. He opens his eyes slowly. There is no alarm clock. Instead, the city itself is the signal. Distant carts. Voices downstairs. A rooster somewhere in a courtyard. Morning has arrived. Light enters the room through a narrow window. Glass windows were rare in ordinary homes. Instead, shutters or cloth coverings controlled the light. As the sun rises, golden lines fall across the plaster wall. Marcus sits up. The floor beneath his feet is cool stone. He stretches, then pauses. Because mornings in Rome did not begin with silence. They began with noise, and sometimes with smell. Outside the window, someone is already cooking. Bread dough hitting a wooden table. Olive oil sizzling. A pot being moved across coals. Food was prepared early. Roman households typically ate a light breakfast called ientaculum. This meal could be simple. Bread, olives, cheese, sometimes fruit. For wealthier families, honey or eggs. But for many Romans, breakfast was quick. The real meal would come later in the day. A historical writer from the 1st century AD once described Roman mornings as bustling almost immediately after sunrise. One Roman poet, Juvenal, even complained about how noisy Rome had become. He wrote that sleep was nearly impossible in the city. Wagons rattled through the streets at night. Merchants shouted at dawn. And neighbors argued through thin walls. Rome, in other words, rarely rested. And somewhere nearby, a bakery is already awake. Bread was one of the most important foods in Roman daily life. By the 1st century AD, Rome had hundreds of bakeries. Large stone ovens burned almost constantly. Workers rose before sunrise to prepare dough, flour, water, salt, sometimes herbs or olive oil. The smell traveled through entire neighborhoods. Warm bread drifting through narrow streets. If you lived nearby, you woke up smelling it. Marcus knows the scent well. He stands now, pulls on a simple tunic. Roman clothing in daily life was surprisingly straightforward. Most men wore a knee-length wool tunic. Loose, comfortable, easy to work in. The famous Roman toga was not everyday clothing. In fact, it was heavy and awkward. Most Romans only wore it for official occasions. For daily life, the tunic was enough. Marcus sits and ties his sandals. Leather straps across the foot. Romans called them calligi or soli depending on the design. They were practical. But streets in Rome could be rough. Stone paving. Mud after rain. Waste from animals. Even early in the morning, the ground outside could be messy. Romans accepted this as part of city life. No one expected spotless streets. That idea belongs more to modern cities. A faint breeze enters through the window, carrying new sounds now. Voices from the street. A merchant calling out prices. A donkey cart creaking past. And somewhere a hammer striking metal. Rome is waking fully now. If you walked outside at this moment, you would notice something interesting. Roman mornings did not begin slowly for everyone. For some people, work had already started hours ago. Bakers, water carriers, dock workers near the Tiber River, farmers arriving from outside the city walls. Rome depended on thousands of workers who began their day before sunrise. Without them, the city simply could not function. One of the most important early morning tasks involved water. Rome had famous aqueducts, enormous stone structures carrying fresh water from distant hills. But most apartments still did not have running water inside. Instead, people visited public fountains. Large stone basins placed throughout neighborhoods. Water flowed constantly from carved spouts. Residents filled clay jars and carried them home. It was a daily routine, and often a social one. If Marcus needs water this morning, he will go there. The walk is short, only a few streets away. Others will already be waiting. Women with jars. Children sent on errands. Neighbors exchanging quiet greetings. Morning conversations happened here. Before work. Before markets opened fully. Before the city became too crowded. The sky is brighter now. Soft orange light touches the rooftops. Smoke curls upward from cooking fires. The smell of baking bread grows stronger. And somewhere in the distance a temple bell sounds. A signal that another Roman day has begun. Marcus pauses by the window, listening, watching the city come alive. For him, this moment is ordinary. Just another morning. Another walk through the streets. Another day of work. But for us, centuries later, it raises an interesting question. If you woke here tomorrow morning, in the crowded streets of ancient Rome, would the city feel strange to you? Or would it begin to... The morning light spreads slowly across the rooftops of Rome. At first it touches the upper walls of the Insula. Then it slides downward into the narrow streets below. Shadows shorten. Doors open. And the quiet moments of dawn begin to disappear. Because once the sun rises above the hills surrounding the city, Rome changes quickly. Within minutes the streets grow louder. Footsteps echo across the stone pavement. Merchants roll open wooden shutters. Voices overlap in dozens of conversations. The city is fully awake. Marcus steps outside his building. The street already feels crowded. A woman passes carrying a clay jar balanced against her hip. Two boys run past him, laughing, chasing one another toward the fountain. Nearby, a donkey pulls a cart stacked with baskets of vegetables. Cabbages, onions, bundles of herbs tied with twine. The driver clicks his tongue softly, guiding the animal through the narrow road. These scenes were not unusual. In fact, by the 1st century AD, Rome may have had nearly 1 million inhabitants, making it one of the largest cities in the ancient world. Crowded streets were simply part of daily life. For many Romans, the first destination of the morning was not work. It was water. Despite the incredible engineering of Roman aqueducts, most homes did not contain private plumbing. Instead, people relied on neighborhood fountains. These fountains were fed continuously by aqueduct systems bringing water from distant mountains. One famous example was the Aqua Claudia, completed in AD 52 under the Emperor Claudius. It carried water nearly 70 kilometers toward the city. But that water still had to reach the people. And so fountains became gathering places. Marcus arrives at one such fountain. A carved stone basin stands against the wall of a small square. Water pours constantly from a bronze spout shaped like a lion's head. The sound is steady. A quiet rushing stream. Clay jars line the edge of the basin. Some already filled. Others waiting. A woman dips her container carefully into the flow. Two neighbors speak softly nearby. One complains about rising bread prices. Another mentions a festival that will take place later in the week. Conversations like these happened every morning across the city. Rome was not just crowded. It was social. Even the simplest tasks became opportunities to talk. Marcus fills his own small container. The water is cool, clear, carried from distant hills by gravity alone. Roman aqueducts were carefully engineered with very slight slopes, sometimes only a few centimeters per kilometer. But that was enough to move millions of liters of water every day. Without pumps, without engines, just stone channels and careful design. He lifts the jar and begins walking back toward his street. Now the smells of the city have grown stronger. Fresh bread, warm olive oil, but also animals, horse manure, waste from the previous day still waiting to be cleared away. Ancient cities rarely smelled clean. In fact, historians often remind us that Roman streets were lively but also messy. Waste disposal was inconsistent. Some buildings had drainage channels. Others did not. People simply adapted. What might seem unpleasant to us today was simply part of urban life. As Marcus walks, he passes a small shop where a baker is stacking loaves onto a wooden tray. The bread is round, scored into wedges before baking. This shape made it easy to break apart. Roman bakeries often stamped their loaves with marks identifying the baker. Some preserved loaves from the buried city of Pompeii still show these markings today. They look surprisingly modern. A reminder that bread even then was part of daily routine. Marcus pauses briefly. The smell is tempting. But breakfast is simple today. Back upstairs in his room, he tears a piece of yesterday's bread, dips it into olive oil, adds a few olives from a small dish. This small meal is his ientaculum. Roman breakfasts were usually light. The main meal, called cena, came later in the afternoon or evening. But mornings required energy. Workdays were long. Outside his window, the street continues to grow busier. A group of laborers walks past carrying wooden tools. One man balances a ladder across his shoulder. Another carries a basket filled with nails and metal fittings. Construction was constant in Rome. Buildings rose quickly, and sometimes collapsed just as quickly. Many insulae were poorly built. Fires were also common. Because most apartments relied on open flames for cooking and heating, urban life could be unpredictable. The Roman writer Strabo once described Rome as a city that was constantly rebuilding itself. Walls repaired, homes expanded upward, shops renovated. The city never felt finished. It simply kept growing. Meanwhile, the markets begin opening. Wooden stalls appear along wider streets, tables covered with cloth, baskets filled with vegetables, fish laid out on crushed ice imported from mountain regions when possible. Vendors call out their prices. Their voices mix with the clatter of carts and the chatter of shoppers. This is where many Romans will buy food for the day. Unlike modern supermarkets, food shopping was usually done daily. Fresh ingredients spoiled quickly in warm Mediterranean weather. So people returned often. Sometimes every morning. A young girl walks past carrying a small basket. Her mother follows closely behind. They are heading toward the market square. Children in Rome often helped with errands. Families depended on everyone's contribution. Even simple tasks like collecting bread or olives. Work and daily life blended together. Further down the street, a barber opens his shop. He sets a stool outside. Places a small mirror against the wall. Roman men frequently visited barbers. Not only for haircuts but for shaving. Beards were not always fashionable. In many periods, clean-shaven faces were preferred. Barbers became small neighborhood figures. They heard gossip, shared news, sometimes even mediated disputes between customers. Marcus watches briefly from his window. Another ordinary scene. Another quiet moment in the daily rhythm of the city. Yet each small detail reveals something about life here. How people moved. How they ate. How they worked together inside crowded spaces. Rome was not only a place of emperors and armies. It was also a city of routines. Morning routines. Water routines. Food routines. Small habits repeated thousands of times every day. And perhaps that is what makes ancient life feel so familiar. Because beneath the marble temples and famous monuments, people still woke up hungry, still hurried to work, still greeted their neighbors in the morning. The details were different. The streets smelled different. The buildings looked different. But the rhythm of the day might not feel entirely unfamiliar. And as the sun climbs higher over the rooftops of Rome, one quiet question lingers. If you walk these streets long enough, would the city begin to feel strange? Or would it The sun is now higher above the rooftops of Rome. Light spills into the narrow streets. The shadows that once stretched across the stone pavement have begun to shrink. Morning has fully arrived. And with it comes the steady rhythm of Roman work. For many people in the city, the quiet moments of waking are already long gone. By this hour, thousands of residents have stepped into the streets. Laborers head toward workshops. Vendors arrange goods in the markets. Clerks and messengers hurry through crowded alleys carrying wax tablets and rolled documents. The city is moving. Slowly perhaps, but constantly. A man like Marcus would not have the luxury of lingering long after breakfast. Work waits. In ancient Rome, most people worked 6 days a week. The Roman calendar included numerous festivals and religious holidays throughout the year, but ordinary days were filled with labor. The Roman writer Pliny the Younger once described how early the working day could begin, noting that many citizens started their duties shortly after sunrise. In a city of this size, there was always something to build, repair, transport, or sell. And nearly every street contained some kind of small business. A short walk from Marcus's building, the smell of hot metal drifts into the street. A blacksmith's workshop is already active. Inside, sparks fly as a hammer strikes iron. The sound is sharp, rhythmic, metal against metal. Roman workshops were rarely quiet places. Carpenters cut timber. Potters spun clay on simple wheels. Dyers worked with vats of colored liquids that stained their hands and clothing. Each trade had its own sounds, its own smells. And when you walked through the city, you could often tell what kind of work happened nearby simply by the air around you. Fish markets smelled of salt and sea. Leather workshops smelled sharp and sour from tanning chemicals. Bakeries smelled warm and comforting, filled with flour dust and rising dough. To a Roman citizen, these scents formed a kind of invisible map of the city. Marcus turns into a slightly wider street. Here the traffic grows heavier. Carts creak under the weight of goods being delivered to shops. Some carry amphorae filled with olive oil or wine. Others carry sacks of grain imported from across the Mediterranean. Rome depended heavily on imported food. Grain shipments arrived regularly from provinces like Egypt and North Africa. Without these supplies, the enormous population of the capital could not be fed. Ships unloaded their cargo at ports along the Tiber River, and from their wagons carried the goods into the city. The process never stopped, even in the early morning hours. Because of this constant movement, Roman streets could become chaotic very quickly. In fact, by the time of Julius Caesar, new rules had already been introduced to manage traffic inside the city. Heavy wagons were often banned from the streets during daylight hours. Instead, they moved mostly at night when the roads were less crowded. It was one of the earliest attempts at urban traffic regulation. Yet even with such rules, mornings could feel crowded. Pedestrians squeezed past one another along narrow walkways. Vendors shouted over the noise. Animals pushed through gaps in the crowd. The city breathed in a constant flow of motion. Marcus eventually reaches the small workshop where he works. The building is modest. A wooden door stands open to the street. Inside, sunlight filters through a high window, illuminating tools arranged along the wall. Workshops like this were the backbone of Rome's economy. While the empire is often remembered for its emperors and soldiers, the daily functioning of the city relied on craftsmen, traders, builders, and servants. Ordinary people. People whose names history rarely recorded. And yet their work shaped the city every day. Marcus begins his tasks quietly. Perhaps he repairs furniture, or shapes wooden beams, or assists a merchant by organizing goods. The exact job matters less than the routine itself, because Roman life, like modern life, was structured by routine. Morning meant preparation. Midday meant work. Evening meant rest and food. The rhythm repeated again and again. Meanwhile, outside, the city continues to grow louder. By mid-morning, Rome's markets are fully active. The largest of these markets sits near the Roman Forum, the political and commercial heart of the city. Merchants gather there to sell everything from vegetables to imported spices. The historian Tacitus once wrote about the dense crowds that filled these public spaces. People did not simply come to buy food. They came to talk, to hear news, to observe public life. Rome was a city where information traveled quickly through conversation. Gossip moved faster than written messages. Someone arriving from another province might bring stories about distant wars. A traveler might describe strange customs from foreign lands. A politician might give a speech in the forum. News spread through voices, through crowds, through shared curiosity. For a moment, imagine standing in that marketplace. The stone ground beneath your feet is worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Sunlight reflects off pale marble buildings nearby. Around you, merchants argue over prices. Children weave through the crowd carrying baskets. A dog barks somewhere near a butcher's stall. It is not quiet, but it is alive. And perhaps the most surprising thing about mornings in Rome is how quickly this energy builds. Only a short time ago, the streets were dim and half empty. Now they feel almost overwhelming. Yet for the people living here, this was simply the beginning of the day. The city had many more hours of movement ahead. Work would continue until the afternoon sun began to soften. Only then would many Romans start preparing for the main meal of the day. But that moment was still far away. For now, the city moves forward with steady momentum. Shops open. Tools strike wood and stone. Voices echo between the tall apartment walls. And somewhere in the distance, another oven door opens as a baker prepares the next batch of bread. The rhythm of daily life continues. Unremarkable perhaps. Ordinary even. But within these ordinary moments lies a quiet truth about the past. History is often told through battles and emperors, through monuments and dramatic events. Yet the real texture of ancient life existed in mornings like this. In crowded streets. In small workshops. In the simple act of waking up and beginning another day. And if you had lived here long enough walking these same streets each morning, would the vast city of Rome still feel ancient and distant? Or would it simply begin to feel like the place where you're... By the time the sun climbs higher over the rooftops of Rome, the city has settled into the steady rhythm of late morning. The early rush has softened. The streets are still crowded, but the urgency of dawn has passed. Now people move with a more familiar pace. Merchants stand comfortably behind their stalls. Craftsmen continue their work inside open-front workshops. Neighbors pause in the street to exchange longer conversations. The city breathes differently now. If you were walking through Rome at this hour, you might begin to notice how closely daily life unfolded in public view. Modern cities often hide routine activities behind doors and private spaces. But in ancient Rome, much of life happened outside. Doors remained open. Windows overlooked the streets. Shops operated directly along the sidewalk. As a result, walking through the city felt almost like passing through a long series of connected rooms. A baker kneads dough where anyone can see. A tailor stitches cloth beside the doorway of his shop. A cook stirs a pot over a small charcoal stove while speaking with customers passing by. The street is not just a road. It is a shared living space. One reason for this openness was simple architecture. Most apartments inside Roman Insula were small and dark. The higher floors especially received little light and fresh air. So whenever possible, people stepped outside. The street offered light, movement, conversation. In many ways, it felt more comfortable than the rooms above it. This made Roman neighborhoods lively places where people knew one another well. Regular customers returned to the same baker each morning. Neighbors recognized familiar footsteps in the stairwell. Children played games in small courtyards between buildings. Life unfolded slowly but visibly. The historian Suetonius once noted that Rome's crowded housing conditions meant that residents were constantly aware of each other's routines. Voices traveled easily through thin walls. So did laughter. Arguments too. Privacy in the modern sense was limited, but community life was strong. Meanwhile, the sunlight now reaches deep into the streets. It reflects softly from pale plaster walls and worn stone pavement. The warmth of the day begins to build. In summer months, Roman mornings could already feel hot by this hour. For that reason, many workers tried to complete demanding tasks earlier in the day. Stone cutters worked quickly before the midday heat became uncomfortable. Builders carried heavy materials while the air was still cool enough to allow steady movement. By midday, the sun over Italy could become intense. Shade became valuable, and people naturally adjusted their schedules around the climate. This rhythm shaped Roman life in subtle ways. Work began early. Rest periods sometimes appeared in the hotter parts of the afternoon, and activity often resumed again later in the evening. Even without modern clocks, people understood these patterns well. The position of the sun guided their routines. Back in the streets, the markets continue their steady business. Vendors call out offers to passers-by. A fish seller lifts a freshly caught sea bream for inspection. Its silver scales glimmer in the sunlight. Nearby, a fruit merchant arranges figs in neat piles across a wooden table. Figs were a common food in the Roman world, fresh in season, dried for storage during colder months, sweet, soft, and easy to carry. Simple foods like these filled the baskets of everyday shoppers. Not every Roman household could afford elaborate meals. For many families, daily cooking relied on a small set of familiar ingredients: bread, olive oil, beans, vegetables, cheese when available, occasionally meat or fish. Yet even simple meals could feel satisfying after a long morning of work. Across the city, small food stalls also offered quick snacks to travelers and laborers. These early versions of street food shops were sometimes called thermopolia. Inside, large clay jars were built directly into stone counters. Each jar held warm food ready to serve: stews, lentils, wine mixed with water. Archaeologists have uncovered many such counters in the buried streets of Pompeii, where preserved jars and serving spaces still remain. They reveal how common quick public meals were for people who did not cook at home. In fact, many small apartments lacked proper kitchens. Cooking over open flames inside crowded buildings carried serious risks of fire. So people often relied on bakeries, taverns, or food stalls instead. Once again, daily life flowed outward into the streets. Rome functioned almost like an enormous shared household. As the morning continues, a new sound echoes across the district: the steady splash of water. Someone nearby has begun cleaning the pavement. Buckets of water thrown across dusty stone. The water washes away loose dirt and scraps left behind by the early crowds. Street cleaning was not systematic across the city, but local residents often managed small efforts like this themselves. Keeping the immediate area usable was simply part of living together in tight spaces. Further down the road, a teacher gathers several young boys near a shaded corner. School lessons in Rome were often held in simple spaces like this, sometimes inside rented rooms, sometimes outdoors beneath covered walkways. Education varied widely depending on family wealth, but basic literacy was valued, especially for boys who might later enter business or administration. The poet Horace once described children carrying their writing tablets through busy streets on their way to lessons. The tablets were coated in wax. Students used a pointed stylus to scratch letters into the surface. Mistakes could be smoothed away by rubbing the wax flat again. A practical system. Reusable. Quietly efficient. The boys sit now, repeating words spoken by their teacher. Their voices rise and fall in uneven rhythm. Occasionally one laughs. Another loses focus and stares toward the street. Education, like everything else in Rome, unfolded in the middle of daily life. Nothing was truly separated from the city around it. As the sun climbs higher, the brightness of the day grows stronger. Shadows shrink along the pavement. The sounds of work continue steadily. Hammer strikes, cartwheels, voices calling prices. Rome moves forward hour by hour. Yet even in this busy moment, there is something almost peaceful about the repetition of these routines. People working, talking, buying food, teaching children. The details may feel distant across centuries, but the pattern itself remains familiar. Every city in every era begins its day in similar ways. A slow awakening, a gathering of voices, 1,000 small tasks quietly beginning at once. And if you stood here long enough, watching the people of Rome move through their morning, would the ancient city begin to feel less like history, and more like a place where ordinary life? By late morning, the streets of Rome hum with activity, yet a subtle rhythm persists beneath the noise. Marcus steps into a slightly quieter alley, away from the bustling market. The narrow passage is lined with tall insulae, their upper floors leaning slightly inward. Shadows cling to the stone walls, offering relief from the growing heat. Here, life unfolds differently. The hum of the city continues, but personal routines take shape in the quieter spaces between the main roads. Women hang laundry from wooden beams projecting from their apartments. Linen sheets sway gently in the breeze, flapping softly above the heads of pedestrians. This simple act, a daily task, connects families across the city. It is intimate, mundane, and strangely revealing. Laundry in ancient Rome often involved unusual practices. Urine was commonly used as a cleaning agent due to its ammonia content. To modern eyes, this might feel shocking, but Romans saw it as an ordinary, practical solution. Families, laundries, and fullers all relied on this method. The act itself reflected an economy of resources and a willingness to embrace what worked regardless of comfort. Nearby, a group of children gathers around a small fountain. Some splash their hands in the cool water. Others attempt to fill tiny clay cups, competing for the steady flow. Children were active participants in the city's rhythm. Their play intertwined with chores and errands, and their presence shaped the energy of neighborhoods. A baker appears from his shop carrying a tray of fresh loaves. The smell of baked bread mingles with the faint tang of the fountain water, the scent of animals, and the faint smoke from cooking fires. Marcus pauses, observing. He recognizes the patterns. The baker delivers, children play, merchants arrange goods, and neighbors exchange brief greetings. Every motion is familiar, repeated daily, and quietly extraordinary. One interesting custom of the period involves how Romans used communal spaces. Public latrines, for example, were not merely functional, they were social spaces. Citizens engaged in conversation, exchanged news, and maintained a communal understanding of hygiene. Romans saw nothing indecent in these routines. The intimacy of daily life was normalized across social boundaries. Marcus continues his walk and notices an older man seated on a low step, sharpening tools for a carpenter. The man hums softly, his concentration steady. Around him, passers-by nod politely, acknowledging the small yet essential labor. In the daily ebb and flow of the city, even minor work held a rhythm of quiet significance. Each person contributed to a living network of productivity, interdependence, and shared space. Meanwhile, street vendors display seasonal produce: figs, grapes, and olives arranged in neat baskets. The textures and colors catch the light, and Marcus observes the care taken in arranging these offerings. Markets were more than transactional spaces, they were sensory experiences. Smells, colors, sounds, and textures converge to form an intimate connection between sellers, buyers, and the environment. As Marcus moves further along, he observes a small shrine tucked into a building corner. A humble statue of a deity receives a few offerings: a coin, a sprig of laurel, a bit of incense smoke curling upwards. Daily devotion, practiced quietly in public view, was common in Roman neighborhoods. These small acts reflected personal belief and communal awareness simultaneously, intertwining the spiritual with the mundane. By this point, the rhythm of Rome is undeniable. The combination of work, play, devotion, and domestic chores creates a tapestry of ordinary life. Marcus's morning walk illustrates how deeply the city relied on routines and rituals, both practical and cultural, to sustain its immense population. And as he pauses at a street corner, listening to the chorus of voices, footsteps, and distant hammers, a reflective thought emerges. Strange as some habits might seem today for the Romans, these were ordinary actions. The city was alive because of them. Every gesture, every step, every small routine mattered. If you were walking these streets alongside Marcus, would the city's daily pulse feel chaotic or comforting? Would you notice the strange practices, or simply the human pattern beneath them, connecting you to a civilization long past but intimately familiar? As the morning moves toward midday, the warmth of the Roman sun intensifies, casting sharper shadows along the streets of Rome. The city's rhythm shifts subtly. The early flurry of activity slows in certain areas, replaced by more deliberate, careful movements. Merchants pause to rest and tally accounts. Craftsmen lean against walls, wiping sweat from their brows. The noise remains, but a different kind of energy now permeates the streets, a steady, enduring hum rather than the earlier rush. Marcus navigates through a busy intersection. Nearby, a small group of porters lifts crates from a wagon. The sound of wood scraping cobblestones mixes with muffled voices negotiating delivery. This kind of labor was vital to the functioning of the city. Without these workers, the markets could not operate, homes would remain empty of goods, and the rhythm of daily life would falter. Even ordinary labor carried its own sets of rituals and routines. Porters often started their day early, carrying goods along designated streets to avoid congestion, and they observed strict methods for stacking, balancing, and delivering heavy loads safely. The knowledge of such practices passed from older workers to younger apprentices, forming an oral tradition of skilled labor embedded into everyday life. As Marcus continues, he notices the distinct scent of bread and roasted meats from a nearby thermopolium. These small food stalls catered to the many city residents who lacked kitchens at home. Eating outside or purchasing ready-made meals was normal, and it shaped a subtle social culture. Patrons paused to greet each other, exchanged news, and observed the flow of city life while enjoying simple food. In ancient Rome, hygiene and cleanliness were integrated into daily routines in ways that might surprise modern viewers. Streets were not spotless by contemporary standards, yet Romans practiced personal care with care and structure. Public bathhouses, such as the ones Marcus might visit later, offered places to wash, socialize, and even conduct business. The rituals of bathing involved multiple stages: warming, cleansing, and cooling, often accompanied by conversation and observation. Interestingly, daily hygiene also intertwined with social norms and accessibility. Not everyone could afford the same quality or frequency of bathing, yet communal spaces allowed for shared experiences. The historian Seneca wrote about the philosophical side of cleanliness, that tending to the body and observing public rituals was part of maintaining dignity and personal discipline. Marcus pauses briefly to observe children playing near a fountain. Their laughter rings through the air, unself-conscious and spontaneous. Play, as much as work or domestic labor, was part of the social fabric. Young ones learned routines and responsibilities while also participating in games that mirrored the adult world, trading, negotiating, and collaborating. In their own way, they were absorbing the rhythms of the city. Around midday, shadows from tall buildings shrink, and sunlit areas become almost harshly bright. People adapt instinctively. Labor slows during peak heat, shops close for brief breaks, and vendors cover goods to protect them. Romans developed these natural patterns to manage energy and productivity without artificial aids. The city's design itself, narrow streets, open courtyards, shaded porticos, helped mitigate environmental extremes, revealing an intimate understanding of daily life and comfort. Meanwhile, Marcus notices a small group of scribes seated outside a shop, copying letters onto wax tablets. Literacy was unevenly distributed, yet scribes played a vital role in documenting contracts, trade agreements, and letters for clients who could not write themselves. Their work was meticulous, requiring focus and precision, and it connected people across the city through a shared network of communication. Even ordinary sounds contribute to the texture of daily life. The clatter of carts on cobblestones, the rhythmic hammering from workshops, children laughing, dogs barking. All these details combine to create an audible map of Roman routine. For someone like Marcus, the city's symphony was familiar and comforting. And in the midst of this structured activity, there is always room for small surprises. A passerby might encounter a new face from a distant province, hear an unusual instrument being played in the street, or witness a fleeting act of generosity or kindness. These minor deviations from the norm reveal the human side of Rome, the unpredictability that existed within otherwise rigid routines. So as the sun reaches its zenith and the city enters the peak of daily activity, one can reflect quietly, the ordinary acts of ordinary people, laboring, trading, caring for family, teaching children, maintaining hygiene, and sharing space, form the lifeblood of Rome. It is in these small, sustained rhythms that the true story of the city unfolds. If you were walking alongside Marcus at this hour, would the city feel overwhelming, or would you sense the subtle harmony beneath the noise? Could the pulse of everyday life, centuries later, still feel familiar to us today? As the afternoon approaches in Rome, the pace of the city begins to shift once again. The sun moves westward, and the intensity of midday heat gradually softens into a warm, golden light that drapes over the streets and buildings. Shadows stretch across the worn stone, and a sense of calm settles over certain corners, even as the markets continue their steady rhythm. Marcus moves through a quieter street, where the sound of carts rolling over cobblestones has thinned and the voices of vendors now call with a slower cadence. He notices a woman kneeling in front of a small shrine tucked between two insulae. She places a simple offering, a few coins and a sprig of herbs, and bows her head in quiet devotion. These intimate rituals were commonplace in Rome, blending private belief with public space. They remind us that religious practice was not always grand or ceremonial. Often, it was woven seamlessly into daily routines. Nearby, a fulling workshop operates with steady determination. Workers press, beat, and rinse cloth to remove dirt and oils. The smell of fermented urine, a method for cleaning textiles, permeates the air. It may seem shocking now, but for Romans this practice was perfectly ordinary. Practicality often outweighed notions of discomfort. Observing these workshops, Marcus understands how essential such labor was to maintaining the flow of daily life. Without clean clothing, hygiene and social norms would falter. In a small alley, a group of children plays a game with pebbles, their laughter bouncing off stone walls. One child trips and falls, quickly aided by a companion. Even the smallest interactions, play, help, and shared attention, formed an unseen social network within the city. Children were not idle observers. They actively participated in the rhythms of community life, learning both practical skills and social behaviors through everyday experience. At the same time, merchants begin closing some stalls for a brief respite. Others continue business, shouting softly to attract late-afternoon shoppers. Fresh fruit, baked bread, and jars of olives remain on display, enticing customers with familiar aromas. The mixture of smells, sweet figs, warm bread, and distant smoke from hearths creates a sensory backdrop that defines Rome in ways that no architectural marvel could capture. These scents, tied to human activity rather than grandeur, offer a tangible connection to the lives of ordinary people. Marcus pauses at a small fountain, watching water ripple over its stone basin. People stop to fill vessels or to refresh themselves. Public fountains were more than sources of water. They were gathering points for exchange, gossip, and observation. Here one could learn about the day's news, hear tales from distant provinces, or simply observe neighbors in their daily routines. The fountain becomes a quiet stage where human life unfolds in patterns both ordinary and revealing. Nearby, A shoemaker hunches over his workbench, hammering leather with precision. Each stitch and cut follows long-established techniques passed from master to apprentice. These small crafts sustained families, shaped neighborhoods, and preserved practical knowledge. Without such labor, the city could not function. And yet, it is easy to overlook these contributions when focusing on monuments or political events. In many Roman homes, women are busy with food preparation. Simple ingredients, grains, legumes, vegetables, occasionally fish, are turned into meals that nourish both body and social bonds. Cooking is performed with care, attention to smell, texture, and flavor. Family members gather to eat, exchange news, and maintain social cohesion. These domestic routines, often invisible in grand histories, provide the foundation for the city's larger social and economic life. The historian Pliny the Elder noted that ordinary tasks, when observed closely, reveal the extraordinary structure of Roman society. Each action, sweeping the street, delivering bread, or arranging a market stall, connects individuals into a living network that sustains the entire community. The beauty of Rome was not only in its monuments but in these subtle, persistent rhythms of daily life. As the afternoon deepens, Marcus observes neighbors pausing to rest. Some sit in the shade of porticos. Others lean against walls, chatting softly or simply watching the world move around them. Even within bustling streets, moments of stillness exist, allowing reflection and subtle observation. These pauses are as integral to the city's rhythm as the noise and labor that dominate its daytime pulse. And so, as Marcus continues through the quieting streets, the reflection emerges. What may appear strange or mundane today, the communal washing of cloth, the intimate street-side rituals, the careful balance of work and leisure, was entirely normal to Romans. Daily life was a tapestry of practical habits, social norms, and human connection, forming a steady rhythm that allowed the city to thrive. If you walked these streets alongside Marcus, could you feel the pulse of everyday life, the quiet choreography of human routines, and sense how these ordinary actions sustain the extraordinary world of ancient Rome? Could you appreciate that history is not only the story of emperors and wars, but of the small, lived experiences that made a civilization truly human? As the afternoon wanes in Rome, the city takes on a subtler, more contemplative atmosphere. The harsh glare of midday softens, leaving warm, golden hues along the streets and stone buildings. Sounds shift, too, less shouting, fewer carts rattling over cobbles, replaced by the gentle hum of ongoing work and quiet conversations. Marcus walks through a quieter market lane, noting the subtle choreography of daily life. A fruit vendor arranges the last figs of the day, stacking them in precise pyramids. A baker wipes his hands on a cloth, preparing to close the shop while a few lingering customers finish their purchases. Each small action is deliberate, ordinary, yet imbued with rhythm. These daily patterns, repeated countless times across neighborhoods, created the invisible scaffolding that supported the city. In a side alley, Marcus notices women gathering at a communal water basin. They chat quietly while washing garments, wringing them out over stone troughs. The practice of shared washing spaces highlights both necessity and social connection. Water, a precious resource in urban environments, drew people together, encouraging exchange and subtle oversight. While modern observers might focus on the unusual methods, soaking, beating, or using substances like fuller's earth and urine, the Romans saw nothing extraordinary. These routines were a practical part of life, executed with efficiency and familiarity. Elsewhere, a small group of young apprentices hunches over a craftsman's bench. One practices engraving patterns into bronze, another polishes small ceramic vessels. Skill, patience, and repetition define these moments. Observation, guidance from older craftsmen, and hands-on participation ensured the transmission of essential knowledge. It was a quiet, almost meditative form of education, blending labor, artistry, and social apprenticeship into a single cohesive practice. Meanwhile, the sounds of the city's food culture continue subtly. A thermopolium offers warm stews, lentils, and bread to those who cannot cook at home. The smells rise and mingle with scents from nearby ovens and hearths, filling streets with the sensory signature of Roman life. Street food was practical and communal, a shared convenience that shaped social interaction. Patrons might pause briefly to converse, observing neighbors and noting details of city life. Even small culinary habits connected residents, binding daily routines into the larger rhythm of the city. Marcus then notices a small shrine tucked into a shaded corner. Offerings are modest: a coin, a sprig of herbs, a faint wisp of incense smoke. These daily acts of devotion, unremarkable in the context of their culture, reflect a quietly persistent human impulse to recognize forces beyond immediate control, to participate in rituals that punctuate ordinary life. Romans often merged these spiritual moments seamlessly with practical activity, blurring the line between sacred and mundane. Children run past, chasing one another through narrow streets. Their laughter rises above the hum of conversation and labor, unplanned yet entirely natural. Play was not separate from learning. It was an education in social norms, cooperation, and community awareness. The sounds and movements of children brought life to otherwise structured routines, offering glimpses of spontaneity within the ordered rhythm of urban existence. In residential areas, Marcus observes the preparation of evening meals. A family stirs a pot over coals, vegetables simmering with herbs, while the scent of bread from the bakery mixes into the air. Meals were not only sustenance but moments of connection, pauses that punctuated work and study with warmth, conversation, and continuity. Simple foods, prepared daily, maintained the rhythm of human life and reinforced community ties. Evening routines begin to emerge as shadows lengthen. Labor slows, merchants begin closing their shops, and the city prepares for the quieter hours ahead. These transitions are gradual, reflecting the natural cadence of life rather than abrupt change. Marcus notes the subtle interplay between activity and rest, public and private, work and leisure, a balance carefully tuned over generations. As Marcus pauses to take in the city around him, a reflective thought arises. The ordinary acts of cleaning, working, teaching, cooking, and playing form the enduring pulse of Rome. While the monuments endure in stone, it is the daily routines of ordinary people that sustain the life of the city. What may seem strange or quaint now was once ordinary, deeply human, and essential to the functioning of society. If you walked alongside Marcus in these late afternoon streets, could you sense the quiet beauty of routine? Would the rhythms of everyday life, mundane, unremarkable, yet persistent, feel surprisingly familiar even across the centuries? Could you see that history is not only about events or rulers, but about the lived experiences that quietly shape civilization? As the late afternoon sun tilts lower in Rome, the city's rhythm begins to soften, settling into a more reflective pace. Streets that once echoed with the clatter of carts and the shouts of vendors now carry subtler sounds. The distant laughter of children, the scrape of a broom along stone, the gentle murmur of conversation in shaded courtyards. Marcus wanders past a row of insulae, their upper stories leaning slightly inward, forming narrow shafts of light and shadow along the cobblestones. Here, residents are attending to small but necessary tasks. Children gather firewood, women stir cooking pots, and men carry tools or water from the communal fountain. These ordinary movements, repeated daily across neighborhoods, form the unnoticed architecture of urban life. In a quieter alley, Marcus notices a small group of apprentices polishing bronze utensils. The rhythmic tapping and brushing create a soft, almost musical accompaniment to the city's slower afternoon pulse. Craftsmen transmitted skills not only through instruction but through repetition, observation, and communal participation. These minor routines, while seemingly insignificant, preserve the knowledge and structure of daily life across generations. Nearby, a baker collects the last loaves from a clay oven. The scent of warm bread mingles with the earthy smell of stone streets and faint smoke rising from hearths. Street vendors begin packing up their goods. Figs, olives, and grapes are carefully arranged, wrapped, or stored for later use. Food in ancient Rome was as much about ritual and routine as it was about sustenance. Each transaction, each preparation, contributed to a shared sensory understanding of the city's daily life. One interesting custom Marcus observes is the use of public fountains not only for water but as gathering points. Citizens exchange brief greetings, offer news, or simply pause to rest. These spaces functioned as informal social hubs, knitting together neighborhoods in quiet, predictable patterns. The act of gathering water, mundane as it seems, becomes a thread linking individual routines into the fabric of the city. Even personal hygiene carries this rhythm of ordinary life. Romans relied on communal latrines, bathhouses, and carefully timed routines to maintain cleanliness. The use of tools such as the strigil, scraping oils and dirt from the body, was practical and ritualized. Though modern sensibilities may find such practices unusual, within the cultural context they were standard, unremarkable, and deeply human. As Marcus strolls further, he observes the children returning home, guided by older siblings or neighbors. Their laughter has softened into quieter chatter, punctuated by occasional scolding or gentle instruction. Childhood in Rome was a blend of freedom and structured learning, where daily routines taught both practical skills and social expectations. Play and responsibility were intertwined, each shaping the other in subtle, enduring ways. In the residential streets, Marcus notices small domestic rituals. Families preparing meals, sweeping courtyards, or tending small gardens. Smoke rises from hearths, mingling with the scent of olive oil and baked bread. Each household has its own rhythm, yet together they form a layered, harmonious cadence that sustains the city. Observing these patterns, Marcus recognizes that the life of Rome was less about grand monuments and more about the continuous, quiet work of ordinary people. Evening begins to approach, and with it comes a subtle reflection on time and routine. What may appear mundane or even strange today, communal bathing, unusual cooking methods, laundry soaked in unexpected substances, was entirely normal, necessary, and human. These practices connected individuals, neighborhoods, and generations in a shared experience of daily life. As Marcus pauses at the corner of a narrow street, watching shadows lengthen and the city's sounds soften, a reflective question emerges. If you lived in this world, would these routines feel confining or comforting? Would the rhythm of ordinary life across streets and courtyards strike you as strangely familiar, even centuries later? Could you sense that history is not only made in grand events but in the small, consistent gestures that sustain communities day by day? As the late afternoon fades into early evening in Rome, the city takes on a softer amber glow. Light filters through narrow streets, catching on terracotta rooftops and casting long, slanted shadows that stretch across the cobblestones. The heat of the day subsides, replaced by a gentle warmth that invites slower movement and quiet reflection. Marcus moves through a residential district where daily routines begin their gentle transition. Merchants finish tallying their day's earnings, closing shutters and sweeping thresholds. Craftsmen secure their tools, careful to preserve them for the next day's labor. The rhythms of activity slow, giving way to subtle gestures. A neighbor lending a hand with a basket, a mother calling her children home, a passerby pausing to admire the faint scent of herbs drifting from a window. At the edge of a small courtyard, Marcus observes a gathering of women preparing evening meals. They stir pots over low fires, chop vegetables, and knead dough, moving with practiced efficiency. These meals, while modest, are crafted with attention and care, sustaining families both physically and socially. Conversation flows alongside cooking, sharing news, discussing plans, or recounting small events from the day. In these intimate moments, ordinary life reveals its depth and humanity. Nearby, in a narrow alley, a group of children plays quietly, the energy of their afternoon games now slowed to gentle footfalls and whispered laughter. Through play, they practice social norms, coordination, and cooperation, embedding lessons of responsibility and community into their daily lives. The distinction between work and leisure is subtle. Both are integral to the rhythm of the city. Public spaces retain a quiet vitality. A few residents gather at fountains, drawing water for evening needs while exchanging greetings or observing the ebb and flow of neighbors returning home. The fountain, simple and unadorned, serves as both a utility and a subtle social anchor. It reflects the interplay of necessity and community, demonstrating that even the smallest actions, filling a jug, pausing to converse, sustain the invisible structure of urban life. As Marcus passes a small bathhouse, he notes the rituals contained within. Patrons arrive, follow established routines, and depart with a sense of refreshed dignity. Personal care, while practical, also functions as a moment of quiet reflection and social engagement. Bathing, washing, and grooming are not merely chores. They are gestures that shape daily experience, defining rhythm, etiquette, and shared cultural norms. Even the ambient sounds of the city take on a softer cadence. The scrape of carts diminishes, the calls of vendors become gentler, and footsteps echo faintly through shaded corridors. Dogs bark intermittently, and the laughter of children fades into murmurs. This transition mirrors the city's subtle shift from the industrious energy of afternoon to the more contemplative tone of evening. Marcus pauses to watch a small domestic ritual. A man lighting a lamp in his home, the soft glow illuminating a modest interior. Firelight casts flickering shadows across walls and objects, transforming familiar spaces into scenes of quiet beauty. Light, movement, and sound all contribute to the sensory mosaic that defines Roman urban life at this hour. In these moments, reflection emerges naturally. The ordinary, meal preparation, labor, play, hygiene, and social interaction, forms the invisible architecture of daily life. The habits and routines that may seem peculiar today were, for the Romans, essential threads connecting individuals, families, and neighborhoods. They are the pulse of civilization, sustaining it quietly from hour to hour, day to day. If you walked alongside Marcus at this hour, would you sense the gentle poetry embedded in daily life? Could you feel the quiet, persistent energy of ordinary people shaping their world, rather than the grandeur of emperors or monuments? History, it seems, resides not only in dramatic events but in the subtle, consistent patterns that give life its texture and continuity. Evening deepens in Rome, and the city begins to settle into a rhythm distinctly different from the bustle of the day. The golden light has faded, leaving a softer amber hue across stone streets and terracotta rooftops. Sounds are muted now, the clatter of carts is gone, voices carry gently through alleys, and the occasional call of a street vendor punctuates the quiet. Marcus moves through a residential quarter where night routines quietly unfold. Families gather in modest rooms, lighting small oil lamps that cast flickering shadows on walls. The glow illuminates cooking implements, woven mats, and clay vessels, giving the interior spaces a warm intimacy. The act of lighting lamps is more than a practical task. It signals the transition from labor to reflection, from public activity to private domestic life. On a narrow street corner, a baker tends a small hearth to warm late orders. The aroma of bread mingles with the subtle scent of herbs from nearby homes. Patrons arrive briefly, exchanging quiet greetings before returning to their routines. The evening economy functions at a slower tempo, marked by necessity rather than urgency, offering a gentle reflection of the city's daily pulse. In courtyards, children wind down their play, guided by older siblings or parents. They practice small acts of responsibility, arranging toys, sweeping small areas, or preparing simple meals under supervision. These moments, though ordinary, are formative. Daily life, even at its most mundane, trains the young to participate in the wider community, linking personal growth to social continuity. Marcus passes a small communal fountain, where a few residents gather to fill jugs or wash small items. Conversations are quieter now, often punctuated by thoughtful pauses. These spaces, though simple, remain central to community life. Even at night, the fountain serves as a point of connection, illustrating how infrastructure and habit intersect to sustain the city's social fabric. In another corner, a woman tends to a clay oven in her home, ensuring the evening meal is ready. The smell of roasting legumes and bread drifts into the alley, mingling with faint smoke from other hearths. Food preparation, mundane to the participants, carries layers of social and emotional significance. It sustains bodies, but it also fosters family bonds, shapes daily expectations, and reflects cultural norms. Bathhouses, though less frequented at this hour, maintain a quieter presence. Patrons who come late move with care, following established rituals for washing and relaxation. The practice is both practical and meditative, offering a moment of personal reflection in the midst of communal life. Hygiene is not just a task, it is a rhythm that reinforces daily structure and personal dignity. The sounds of the city shift subtly with the cooling air. Footsteps echo in quiet alleys, distant dogs bark intermittently, and the occasional cart passes with a soft clatter. Even in stillness, the city breathes, a layered symphony of human life, every small action a note in the ongoing rhythm of urban existence. As Marcus pauses to observe, a reflective thought emerges. The seemingly ordinary routines, the preparation of food, the tending of homes, the laughter and guidance of children, the simple acts of hygiene and devotion, compose the invisible framework that sustains Roman life. Without them, the city's structure, both physical and social, would falter. If you walked through these streets with Marcus, would you notice the quiet orchestration of human habits? Could you sense how even the smallest acts, repeated day after day, create continuity and cohesion? And would you recognize that history is shaped as much by these persistent routines as by the grand events that often dominate our memories? Night has fully descended over Rome, and the city is enveloped in a calm, almost hushed atmosphere. Lanterns glow softly in windows and along streets, casting warm pools of light against the worn stone. The clamor of daily activity has faded, leaving the subtle chorus of life, distant footsteps, the soft murmur of conversation, and the occasional rustle of fabric or leaves in a gentle evening breeze. Marcus walks slowly through quiet alleys, noticing how ordinary life continues even at this late hour. A family gathers around a modest meal, speaking in hushed tones and pausing to savor each bite. A baker stokes the last embers of the day's oven, preparing for tomorrow, while a few late shoppers collect essentials for their homes. Every small gesture reflects the rhythm of a city built not just on monuments, but on the steady, quiet actions of its inhabitants. In a dim courtyard, children are guided to bed, their laughter now softened into whispered goodnights. Through these moments, lessons of community, responsibility, and daily practice are passed on quietly. Play and work, joy and discipline, all intermingle to create the subtle scaffolding of human life in the city. Marcus notes how these ordinary practices knit together households, neighborhoods, and the broader urban fabric. Bathhouses, now closed for the night, leave faint traces of smoke and water-scented air lingering in nearby streets. Hygiene, once a communal and practical act, fades into the background of the city, yet its imprint remains. Daily routines, cooking, washing, playing, working, resonate as persistent threads weaving together ordinary existence with cultural structure. Marcus pauses at a small shrine tucked into a side alley. The flickering glow of an oil lamp illuminates coins and herbs carefully placed as offerings. Simple acts of devotion, unnoticed by many, underscore the human need for reflection, hope, and ritual. Even in a bustling city like Rome, quiet personal practices punctuate the day, connecting the individual to a larger cultural rhythm. As lanterns sway in the night breeze, Marcus observes the final stirrings of late activity. A sailor returning from the Tiber, a messenger completing deliveries, a neighbor extinguishing lamps and retreating inside. The city, vast and enduring, gradually slows its heartbeat. Yet the patterns of daily life, labor, care, devotion, and small social exchanges, remain at its foundation, sustaining it silently through the night. In these quiet hours, reflection emerges naturally. History is not only the story of emperors, battles, and monumental events. It is found in the subtle, persistent actions of ordinary people. The rhythms of everyday life, simple meals, laughter, chores, hygiene, and private devotion, form the invisible structure upon which civilizations rest. The extraordinary is built from the ordinary, and the pulse of humanity is never absent, even in the shadows of grandeur. If you stood beside Marcus now, would you sense the quiet life that once thrived here? Could you feel the rhythm of human habit echoing through streets, homes, and courtyards? And would you realize that understanding history requires more than monuments or wars? It requires noticing the ordinary lives that sustain them quietly, persistently, across time?